All right. Well, good morning. My name is Dee Sabatis. I am a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe up here in Maine. And I wanted to thank you all for attending this morning and welcome you to the USET third annual Best Practice Conference. We're excited that you're able to join us for this virtual event. Our conference strives this year to embrace storytelling as a valued way of learning and focuses on bringing together success stories from various sectors in the Indian country. This year's agenda will include best practices from across Indian country in the areas of health promotion, disease prevention, data improvement, behavioral health, COVID-19, which has been the story of our life for the last year and a half, and then emergent infectious diseases. We encourage you to navigate through the platform where you can interact with vendors, chat with other attendees, and in the lounge. Oops. You guys still there? Sorry, my computer blacked out for a second. I lost you guys. Chat with others in the lounge and then receive incentives for participation. It's great to be back at USET. I had previous to my current position, I was the health director for Passamaquoddy Indian Township for 3 years, and prior to that, I worked with USET for 18 years as the Tribal Health Program Support Director. So it's good to be back home with the USET family, and I look forward to this virtual conference, and I hope you all do too, because it has some very great agenda topics that's going to help you at the local level to really navigate this pandemic and really help one another, I guess, mentally and really bring together all of your community around health and wellness. Right now, I would like to introduce you to Casey Thorber. He's going to give us our opening prayer.
Good morning, everyone. Casey Thornbrew. My name is Casey Thornbrew, and I'm a citizen of the Mashu Wampanoag tribe, and I serve as USET's Tribal Climate Science Liaison. I was asked to offer an opening prayer, so thank you very much, and I will go ahead and do so right now. Manatka Nikunahonchik, Creator and Ancestors. Katapatanamu Wachi Yukisakuk. I thank you for this day. Katapatanamu Wachi Yakwasanish. I thank you for all things. Katapatanamu Wachi Kisak. I thank you for the sky. Katapatanamu Wachi Anakwasak. I thank you for the stars. Katapatanamu Wachi Aki. I thank you for the land. Katapatanamu Wachi Sipuash. I thank you for the rivers. Katapatanamu Wachi Katahanash. I thank you for the oceans. Katapatanamu Wachi Wami Awaasak. I thank you for all creatures. Katapatanamu Wachi Atonkwasak. I thank you for all of my relations. Ananama Anian Namanat Wipi Wanika. Help us to see only what is good. Ananama Anian Vasina Wipi Sankwa. Help us to do only what is right. Creator, we thank you for bringing all of us together for this best practices conference and meeting. We thank you for giving the strength, the courage, and the resolve to all those who have worked to organize this event and who are seeing it through. We thank you for all the speakers sharing their knowledge, wisdom, and stories to improve the health and health services in our communities and tribal nations. Please be with everyone this week with open hearts and open minds to gain the information to help us build our skills and knowledge to do the work that we do. Creator, we know there are those there who are facing and responding to emergencies, be it COVID situations, Hurricane Ida, or in situations where they may be without power, or other emergency situations requiring their attention. I understand these people may not be available to participate or to fully participate. this week. Please remind us, and those of us who are able to attend and participate in this conference, to bring this information back to our colleagues and to reconnect with them, to use this information also to help our families, community members, coworkers, and colleagues. We thank you for this opportunity to come together in this space this week. It is so.
Yes, may it be so.
Thank you, Casey. And thank you for starting us off in a good way. I think that's one of the things that's been helpful in these virtual sessions is still carrying out our normal functions that we would do in a face-to-face meeting. So thank you for that clear statement. Well, we have a wonderful panel ahead of us and some very great speakers. And I'm honored to introduce our keynote speaker, Chief Many Hearts, Chief Malerba, where she will address working together towards health equity. Chief Malerba became the 18th chief of the Mohegan tribe, which is a lifetime appointment and is the first female chief in the tribe's modern history. Prior to becoming chief, she served as chairwoman of the tribal council and also worked in tribal government as executive director of Health and Human Services. She holds a master's in public administration from the University of Connecticut, an honorary doctorate from the University of St. Joe's in Hartford, an honorary doctorate in science from Eastern Connecticut University, and earned her doctorate of nursing practice at Yale University and was named Jonas Scholar. So please join me in welcoming Chief Many Hearts Malerba.
Thank you for your very kind introduction. And Casey, thank you so much for your blessing. As you know, we are working with Jessie Little-Doe-Baird from Mashpee, who was the former vice chair of Mashpee, in restoring our language because our languages are so close to one another. And so it was good to hear you speaking in your own language. I am, I would just say, good morning. And Kataptol Tamawish, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm so honored to join you. I have a long relationship with USET. I was on the health committee from 1997 until 2005 when I was elected to tribal council, and then I was on the board. And so, USET never fully lets you go. And once you're a member of the USET family, you'll always be a member of the USET family. So I'm really honored to join all of you today because the work that you do is just so important. And as the secretary for right now of United South and Eastern Tribe Sovereignty Protection Fund Board, and on behalf of the board, I welcome you all and thank you all for your commitment to our tribal people. My name is Chief Many Hearts, Lynn Malerba. And the reason I am called Many Hearts is because I spent a long time in healthcare. My initial career, I would say up until 1997, was in nursing, and my specialty was cardiology. I was a manager of critical care units, and then I was a director of multiple critical care areas. And so our medicine woman said, you can't not have a tribal name once you're a chief, and because I'd never taken one. So she said, you can't procrastinate any longer. You need to take a tribal name. And so she very kindly bestowed this name upon me. And she said, you've held many hearts in your hands in the past as a cardiology nurse. And now you, as the chief, are holding our hearts in your hands as the chief. And it was the perfect name. And I'm honored to carry that name forward. And I will say that I have a special fondness and affinity for anyone who is providing help in any capacity to our tribal people. Sometimes when we were working in the hospital, the most important person wasn't the nurse or the doctor that was going to take somebody who was coding up from the ER into the coronary care unit. It was the person who was trying to find a bed to transfer somebody out of the unit so we could get a new patient into the unit when we were busy. So regardless of what your role is, and regardless of the role that you play, know that you contribute so significantly to the health of our people. And for that, I thank you. I know that you're going to be discussing very technical things and very important approaches to work that you do. So today I've decided to focus a bit more on our unique relationship to the world that we live in. And thanks to our ancestors for holding on despite daunting challenges to our lifeways, our culture, and our land. So I begin my comments by saying it is a gift to be Indigenous. No one in this currently called United States has the same connection to this earth, to the sacred directions, and it's the same connection to all of life's forces, and the same reason that we have this connection to all of life forces, that we do the work that we do. By the same token, no one except our First Nations has the same rights to trust and treaty obligations in this United States. And we continue to hold the United States accountable for doing just that. And that's why equity and the work that we do towards health equity is so important. Imagine the fact that despite having all these trust and treaty obligations, that the United States can just wipe out our budget for healthcare with the stroke of a pen, unlike Medicare, unlike Veterans Health, unlike Medicaid. We are the only budget in the federal government that responds to health on the discretionary side of the budget, and that is just not acceptable. So all of the work that you do and all of the work that we do jointly at the federal level to create good policy is the way we are going to create health for our communities. So as a Mohegan woman who has the great fortune to descend from great leaders who continue to inspire me daily, I want to remind all of you that you have the spirits of our ancestors with you, always. Despite sometimes having struggles like poorly budgeted trust and treaty obligations, COVID, environmental injustice, and other major health events that threaten our tribal communities, take strength in that knowledge and remember the ancient ways. It was their strong beliefs, their continued practice of ceremony, herbalism, and respect for nature that ensured our tribal communities continue to exist now and in perpetuity. We are all healing our communities from the devastating effects of colonization, assimilation, and relocation. I also want to say that I truly appreciate the non-Indigenous members of our community who have committed yourselves to this work. We embrace you and we thank you for your good work. The work that everyone does in this space is so important because without the continued physical, cultural, spiritual, emotional, environmental, and mental health of our people, we would cease to exist. It is up to all of us to ensure that we not only exist, but that we thrive as tribal nations. Your work to ensure health equity for our people honors the ancestors, protects those we know today, and ensures the health of those we have yet to know. So Indigenous or not, you are members of our community. We respect you, we embrace you, and we thank you for all of the work that you do. So I thought today for my keynote address, I would talk about Mohegan symbolism and healing and how that continues to influence the work that we all do. Each tribal community has specific beliefs and traditions that inform their healing practices and provide the basis for the continued health of our community. And I know part of this, the theme for this is storytelling and protecting health and creating health through storytelling. Next slide, please. If we could go to the next slide. There we go. So this is a photo of Fidelia Fielding, who was the last fluent speaker of Mohegan. And as I said, we're restoring our language. And so if I offer a blessing, I'm typically reading it because the older I get, the less capacity I have to memorize anything. And also our language is changing as we get more information. So in today's time, the phrase that, that she shared with us could mean that your hearts will always remain where your ancestors are and that you will be guided by them. But we are such a mobile society in modern times. In her time, imagine what it meant to tribes to be removed from their lands, away from their indigenous foods and medicine. Even when we stayed on our lands, our ability to hunt and gather our foods were severely impacted by the colonists fencing in lands, fencing in our traditional hunting and gathering areas. But they allowed their pigs to roam freely and destroy our shellfish beds. So imagine the destruction that they did to our medicine gathering and our food gathering. During the pandemic flu of 1918, many Mohegan people returned home to isolate within the Mohegan community to avoid the devastating consequences of that flu. And I would suspect that that has happened during COVID. It was then that her adopted son returned home and found her diaries written in both Mohegan and English. So this is the basis for our language restoration as of today. And I share this because even in difficult times, we can be given unexpected gifts and we can be inspired by the things that happen during those very difficult times, learn from them, and then adapt our ways to make sure that we respect them. Next slide, please. Mohegan is the wolf clan of the Lenni Lenape tribe. We had to learn how to survive in a new world with new ways of doing things. We had to adapt to new foodways and more restrictions on some of the lands that we found our foods and medicine on. We know how that impacted our health. And now today, food sovereignty and seed saving practices are helping us to restore just that balance. Next slide, please. The land our church sits on was deeded to Mohegan for as long as a Mohegan shall walk this earth by Lucy OCCUM and her daughter Cynthia Hoscott. It was during the removal time and the removal era, and this was a strategy to keep our Mohegan people on our land. If we became Christianized, then we could stay. And in fact, laws were passed by the United States to do just this. These laws were the genesis for the boarding school era, beginning with the Indian Civilization Act Fund of March 3rd, 1918, and the peace policy of 1869, the United States, in concert with and at the urging of several denominations of the Christian Church, adopted an Indian school boarding policy expressly intended to implement cultural genocide through the removal and reprogramming of American Indian and Alaska Native children to accomplish the systematic destruction of our Native cultures in our communities. The stated purpose of this policy was kill the Indian, save the man. So you can see that many times we became Christianized because we wanted to stay on our own lands, but sometimes it was the Christianization that really devastated our cultures and our communities in devastating ways and in ways that we're still recovering from. But as we've learned more about trauma-informed care, our providers are helping our communities heal in very important ways and using culture to heal our communities. Next slide, please. So Gladys Tantaquidgeon was our medicine woman for a very long time. She passed in 2006. She spanned 3 decades. She was 3 centuries. She was born in 1899 and she passed in 2006. She, the belt that you see in this picture is symbolic of the transfer of power to Gladys from Fidelia Fielding and her sociocultural mentor, Martha Uncas. The belt had been worn by only those 3 ladies. And on the belt, you can see the middle is a representation of the 4 directions that gives us strength and wisdom, the trail of life and the tree of life. In many instances on this belt, you'll see various flowers and herbs, which of course represent our medicines. Gladys wrote a book on folk medicine of the Delaware and related Algonquin Indians, and she is somebody who we revere to this day. Her great niece, Melissa Tantaquidgeon-Zobel, is our current medicine woman. And I share a funny comment about Gladys. She just is somebody who is just so amazing in our tribal community, and all of her teachings are teachings that we carry forward. But she was asked, so what's the secret to a long life? And her answer at the time, and this is more in modern days, was, well, you can't continue to pick the herbs, they're polluted, it's really tough, but we continue to practice our traditional ways. But she cautioned us not to eat hot dogs and not to eat processed foods. And she said that perhaps not being married also contributed to her long life. And I share this with you because I read a very funny article this week on CNN news blog. And it talked about the fact that for every hot dog you eat, you lose 21 minutes of life. And I thought, so Gladys was right. And she didn't even have that science behind her. And it just made me laugh. But then I also thought, well, there's got to be a little quality with that quantity of life. So I'm not certain I'm willing to give up hot dogs yet, but she was not wrong. And I think that's what's so impressive to me about the people who came before us. They held knowledge in their hearts. They were informed by our natural world. They lived with that knowledge, and they created health around that knowledge and using that knowledge. Next slide, please. So Gladys was taught by her mentors to understand tribal portents and healing practices. Bad medicine was always prohibited. Only good medicine was to be offered. And I think that that's really important to remember too, because you could consider bad medicine sometimes being the political realm a little bit, and all that negativity that surrounds that political realm. And I think it's up to us to remember that, it's up to us to carry that good medicine and silence all of that noise and focus on what we know is important and what we know is important to our communities. She offered very specific rules about collecting and drying medicines, and they were passed on to her and subsequently to us. And one of the most important lessons that she shared was to surround herself with things that brought good spirits, such as quartz, sweetgrass, cedar, tobacco, and ancient artifacts, because we all believe that those artifacts carry the spirits of the people who created them, and they carry the good spirits of those people who created them and can teach us something, because we don't see artifacts as inanimate objects. We see them as animate with the soul of the people who created them. Next slide, please. So these painted designs represent both the spiritual force and the native conception of the world. The four-dome medallion with the leaves and dots show an expression of equality between native peoples and the land. The natural world is referred to in words that are animate. And of course that is true, because when we think about nature, we think about it as an animate with an equally important place in our world. We all share in the gifts that Mother Earth bestows upon us. Environmentally, how important is that concept? Because we can see what happens to the environment when it is considered something to use, not something that shares this earth with us. It's a very different worldview that natives have. And that's just so important to me, because we need to respect that. And again, when we go back to the fencing of all of those lands and the dividing up of all of those lands, we never believed that that was the way that we should remain on Mother Earth, that we should use what we need, but always leave something behind and always make sure that we protected that land. And so we didn't have that concept of ownership, or the fact that the land was only there to serve us. We were there to live in harmony with the land. Next slide, please. So painted designs on baskets represent both a spiritual force and a native conception of the world. The four-dome medallion with the leaves and dots, again, show an expression of equality between the relationship between native peoples and the land, something we are all trying to restore and to remind people about. The medallions convey ideas about group identity. It encompasses all things under the dome of the sky world, from the four directions traveled or the wind. Dots and circles encompass the spirit of basic things: family, plants, food, medicines, trials, etc. The trail of life goes from east to west, and it shows the ups and downs of life. However, what's most significant about that trail of life are the people that are signified as the dots all along that trail, because it is those people that help us along the trail, and they travel with us. And that's what's most significant, because it's the people on top of the hill that's kind of cheering you on to join them on top of the hill, but it's also the people that are in the valleys or the depressions that are going to help you get back to balance, that are help you get on that trail of life and to keep traveling from east to west. Next slide, please. These baskets again show medallions represented inside and outside stockade fences, and they express the change in the political and social environments, symbolizing the basket maker's opinion that one did not lose their Mohegan identity by leaving. And I think that this is a really important concept for all of our people who don't live or work in their home communities. Understanding that where you go, your people's hearts are always with you is so important. I hope you will always be reminded that we all know the work you do and the work you so diligently provide to our communities We know that you did that on our behalf, and we always thank you for that, but our spirits are always with you, and we are the people on your path that are rooting you on, because we know that the work that you do will restore our communities and make sure that we enjoy good health. As we think about the four directions and the spiritual force that flows through all things, Joe Bruchac, who's an Abenaki man, said that they have told us that these hills were abandoned by magic, yet you touch the earth with a bare palm and you feel its heartbeat. Karen Cooper tells us that as the wind that caresses and shapes this land is made of the voices of the past telling us not to forget. And indeed, we Mohegans are told when the wind blows through the leaves, our ancestors are with us. And so if our ancestors are with us today, you know, our spirits are with you as you do the work that you do. Next slide, please. In Mohegan culture, traditionally, women have been entrusted with the knowledge of the healing properties of plants, as well as the methods of preparing and administering them as medicine. However, occasionally a man is blessed with a vision in which the Creator bestows upon him the great gift of healing. But it is said that he has also carefully followed the teachings of his mother. So here you see my great-grandfather, Chief Mataga, and his nephew, Chief Harold Santaquidgeon, who was our medicine woman, Gladys's brother, using medicine masks that were used in healing ceremonies. Next slide. So Samson OCCUM was born in 1723 in a wigwam, and he became one of the first Indian ministers taught by Eliezer Wheelock, raised money in England for an Indian school. But instead, the money was used to fund the building of Dartmouth College. He became very disillusioned. And remember, earlier on, I talked about Lucy OCCUM leaving land to us so that we could remain on our land. Her brother became so disillusioned, he led an exodus west, forming the Brotherton tribe, eventually in Wisconsin. This bark box tells the story of their journey, showing the Mohegan spread across the landscape, but yet still connected by a chain of strawberries. Again, a reminder that you're always connected to your home and its people, no matter where your life's path takes you. Next slide, please. So these are some of our medicine tools, and they're displayed in our museum, the Santaquidgeon Museum. There's two masks, female and male, red and black to represent life and death. The women's mask has red X's on the cheeks to show life and direction, and the four directions. To the far left is a medicine cup. This white turtle shell is used to collect water for mixing the herbs that we would use for medicines. And next slide, please. So I just want to share a little bit about, methods of curing illness. And you can see, some of the methods that we continue to use today. These traditions and ceremonies are so important to us. And again, we share all of those practices to make sure that we continue with our own balance. Next slide, please. And again, some of the plants that we still use today, you can see, they're not new to anyone that works and practices ceremony and celebrates our culture in this space. Next slide, please. So obviously I had to get a picture of my family in here. But it's important to remember as we think about all the work that we all do, we all follow in the footsteps of those who have become before us. Despite challenges along the way, what you do is remember and heed all the oral traditions that you've been taught by your elders and your ancestors while living with a foot in both worlds, the indigenous world and the world that we have learned to adapt to. We will not heal our nations and protect all our elders and children by taking the federal system and replicating in our tribal communities. We know that that's not the way we lived. It was a way that was forced upon us. This siloed approach to health that we see at the federal level is not the way our people take care of one another. I know that you all take the work that you do seriously. By having this best practices conference every year, you work toward restoring the balance that was taken from us. And you're always trying to incorporate a more indigenous mindset to how we might be of service to our people, despite the fact that we're using science in a very, very targeted way. The work that you do is all so personal. It benefits all of our relations. And I know that life has been so challenging these last almost two pandemic years. And I worry about Indigenous people being hesitant to take a well-researched vaccine by this time. Imagine how strong our numbers would be if our ancestors that we count among us had a smallpox vaccine available to them when they first encountered the immigrants from Europe. Not by accident that General Washington required his troops to get a vaccine when available. As tribal leaders, we complement the work that you do by advocating for good policy at the federal level and ensuring that our United States government lives up to the promises that it made so long ago that allowed this country and all of its people to prosper. In just 4 years, the country now known as the United States will be celebrating its 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. While the ideals expressed in that document were lofty, those ideals did not apply to the Indigenous population in this lands. It is more than ironic that first healthcare for Indians was provided through the War Department during the Civil War for the express purpose of not allowing Indians to provide communicable diseases to the soldiers. I mean, just think about that for a minute. And even when the Indian Reorganization Act was passed, due to the Merriam report showing what difficult circumstances and the poor health status tribes were experiencing in 1934, the discussion at that time was what percentage of Indian blood should one have to be considered an Indian. The Senate Indian Affairs Committee Chairman Wheeler told Commissioner Collier of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, "We're trying to get rid of the Indian problem, not create more." So indeed, part of the Indian Reorganization Act was designed to write tribal constitutions that would bend the tribes toward assimilation. As Vine Deloria Jr. and Clifford Little noted, although there were some variations, in general, the new tribal constitutions and bylaws were standardized and largely followed the Anglo-American system of organizing people. Traditional Indians of almost every tribe strongly objected to this method of organizing and criticized the Indian Reorganization Act as simply another means of imposing white institutions on the tribes. In some of the constitutions, the traditional Indians were able to protect themselves by insisting that the tribal government derive from the more ancient form of government and not be subjected in its operation to the powers that the people had allocated to it. Other tribes rejected the idea of a formal and small tribal council governing them and demanded that the tribal council consist of the whole tribe meeting in concert. Experiences proved this approach to have its merits and its shortcomings. So they wrote that in 1983. And certainly, we're still waiting for this United States to recognize and honor its first peoples and all that we have contributed to allow this country to enjoy the fruits of Mother Earth. What the United States has consistently failed to honor is that we are separate nations with separate governments, separate cultures, and the federal responsibility owed to us for the cession of millions of acres of land and natural resources. We will continue to hold them accountable to ensure that the very issues impacting our health and the social determinants of our health are addressed to our satisfaction. The pandemic has highlighted so many of these shortcomings in ways that could have been foretold. We need to ensure that the paternalistic view of the United States becomes a thing of the past. And the only way to do that is through self-governance and expressing our tribal sovereignty in each interaction with the United States. Tribes were leaders during this pandemic, closing their borders, communicating the urgency for good public health measures in cultural terms, and advocating for funding, adequate PPE, and enough vaccines for not only our tribal members, but for the community members living within our boundaries. Tribes knew that they could not wait for local and state governments to ensure a good response to COVID. The sharing of information, the weekly calls with USET and IHS were excellent examples of our interconnectedness and the responsibility we feel toward one another. And for this, I thank you all. Many of you have heard me say that, yes, we've experienced intergenerational depression due to the painful history we experienced, but we also possess, more importantly, intergenerational resilience. And that will see our countries and our communities to a stronger, more resilient, healthy nation. We have survived attempted genocide, and yet we are still here. We have survived the first germ warfare, and yet we are still here. We have survived brutal attempts at assimilation, and yet we are still here. We have survived relocation, and yet we are still here. We have survived termination, and yet we are still here. We have survived laws intended to diminish our populations and our sovereignty, and yet we are still here. We, as tribal nations, have adapted and found a way to thrive despite the best efforts of the immigrants we encountered to eliminate us from this earth. You, each and every one of you, are all the next generation to ensure that this legacy of strength endures. In our tradition, diamond shapes connote umbuswiko, or good medicine. You are all diamonds on this path of life. Your work honors those who have come before you, and it lights the way for those who will come after you. I thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for all your efforts and your kind attention today. And so with that, I say thank you.
Thank you, Chief Malerba. That was a wonderful presentation, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the week. And before everybody jumps into their own individual breakout sessions, I want to just extend my appreciation to the staff at USET that put this conference together. I think you're going to get a lot from each presentation, and it's very nice to see familiar faces. I just want to shout out to Barbara Whipple. She's my former employee. So it's great to see people from home on the call. But thank you again, Chief Malerba, and we look forward to a great few days of best practices, and I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you again. Have a great conference. Muskenowish and Mohegan, we don't have a word for goodbye. We say see you later. So Dee, remember that, right?
Yes.
But thank you again. I hope you have a great conference. The agenda looks fabulous.
Thank you.